The moment the doorbell rings and the mind tightens, the moment footsteps approach the house and the heart starts calculating escape routes, something ancient wakes up inside certain people. Because for them, guests are not just visitors, they are psychological intrusions, emotional disturbances, silent evaluations, and unconscious threats. And psychology reveals that this anxiety has very little to do with rudeness, hospitality, or manners, and everything to do with how the brain learned to survive long before polite smiles became a social currency. Because for some minds, the home is not just a physical space, it is a nervous system extension, a regulated environment where control, predictability, and emotional safety finally exist. And when guests arrive, that control dissolves instantly, because every guest unknowingly brings unpredictability, judgment, noise, obligation, performance, and social roles that force the brain out of rest mode and into hypervigilance. And this is where the real anxiety begins, because the human brain is wired to treat uncertainty as danger, and guests represent uncertainty disguised as friendliness. Because you don't fully know how long they'll stay, what they'll notice, what they'll judge, what they'll expect, or how much emotional energy they'll demand. And for certain people, especially those who grew up in emotionally unpredictable homes, this loss of control activates a stress response learned in childhood, where unexpected presence once meant criticism, conflict, invasion of privacy, or emotional labor. So the body remembers even when the mind tries to be polite, and psychology calls this a conditioned nervous system response, where the brain learned early that someone arriving equals I must perform, adapt, suppress, or survive. And this is why these individuals don't relax. When guests come, they monitor themselves, their tone, their expressions, their house, their words. Because their sense of safety was never unconditional. It was always earned. And guests reactivate that old program, turning the home into a stage and the self into an actor. And this is exhausting for people whose brains are highly sensitive to social evaluation, because introversion alone does not explain this anxiety. Trauma sensitivity does, and research shows that people with high self-awareness, deep empathy, and strong internal worlds often experience guests as emotional overload, because their minds are constantly scanning for others' comfort, approval, and reactions, which means they cannot be fully present or authentic while guests are around. So instead of joy, they feel pressure. Instead of connection, they feel performance. And the brain releases cortisol rather than dopamine, because it perceives social obligation rather than social reward. And this is intensified in people who associate cleanliness, order, and preparation with worth, because for them a guest is not a human, it is a test, a silent exam that asks, are you good enough, organized enough, generous enough, normal enough? And even when guests say nothing, the mind fills the silence with imagined criticism. Because anxiety is not about what others think, it's about what the mind fears they might think. And psychology explains that this fear often comes from early environments where mistakes were highlighted, privacy was violated, or emotional boundaries were ignored. So the adult brain learned that presence equals exposure, and exposure equals danger. And this is why unexpected guests are especially triggering, because surprise removes preparation, and preparation is how anxious minds feel safe, because preparation gives the illusion of control, and control calms the nervous system. So when someone arrives unannounced, the body reacts before logic can intervene. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, thoughts race, and irritation appears, not because the person is bad, but because the system feels invaded. And many people mislabel this reaction as being antisocial, cold, or unwelcoming. But psychology reveals it is often the opposite. These individuals care deeply, feel intensely, and overfunction emotionally, which is why guests drain them, because they don't just host, they absorb, and absorption without boundaries leads to exhaustion, resentment, and anxiety, especially in people who grew up being responsible for others' emotions, because for them hosting triggers an old role of caretaker, mediator, peacekeeper, and entertainer. And the brain anticipates this labor before it even begins, releasing stress hormones in advance. And this explains why some people feel anxious days before guests arrive, because their nervous system is already preparing for depletion. And interestingly, psychology also shows that people who value autonomy and solitude at a deep level experience guests as a disruption of identity, because their sense of self strengthens in silence, routine, and personal space. And guests interrupt that rhythm, forcing the self outward when it longs to remain inward. And this creates internal conflict, where the person feels guilty for wanting space and anxious for not providing enough. And guilt mixed with anxiety creates irritability, which is often misinterpreted as dislike for people, when in reality it is self-protection. And modern society worsens this anxiety by romanticizing constant social availability, making those who need boundaries feel defective, when in truth their brains are simply wired for depth rather than breadth, meaning they prefer fewer, meaningful interactions over frequent surface level ones. And guests often represent the opposite of that preference, especially when cultural expectations demand extended hosting, endless conversation, and suppressed honesty. So the mind braces itself against authenticity loss, and psychology also points to sensory sensitivity as a hidden factor, because guests bring noise, smells, movement, and unpredictability that overwhelm nervous systems already operating at high sensitivity. And for these individuals, even pleasant company can feel like overstimulation, not because they don't care, but because their brains process more input at once. And when overstimulated, the brain seeks escape, quiet, or irritation as a signal to regain balance. And this explains why some people become short-tempered or withdrawn during visits, not out of malice, but neurological overload. And another layer psychology reveals is identity boundaries, because guests force people into social roles they may not identify with, such as host, entertainer, or caregiver. And when identity and role conflict, anxiety rises, because the brain senses inauthenticity, and inauthenticity feels unsafe to the psyche, especially for people who have spent years suppressing their true selves to be accepted. So guests symbolize yet another moment where they must hide, adjust, and accommodate, and the body resists this unconsciously, creating tension and stress. And this is why relief floods in the moment guests leave, because the nervous system finally returns to regulation, silence, control, and authenticity. And that relief is not antisocial. It is homeostasis restoring itself. And psychology emphasizes that none of this means such people are broken, cold, or unloving. It means their brains prioritize safety, depth, and emotional efficiency over social performance. And when guests arrive, the brain calculates cost rather than benefit, because previous experience has taught it that hosting equals depletion, not reward. And understanding this changes everything, because it allows people to stop shaming themselves for their reactions and start creating boundaries that honor their nervous system, such as limiting visit length, preparing mentally, choosing guests intentionally, or allowing themselves to not perform perfection. And when people learn that anxiety around guests is not a moral failure but a psychological signal, they begin to heal, because the goal is not to eliminate anxiety but to listen to it, understand its origin, and redesign life in a way that respects the mind's wiring rather than fighting it. And this is the hidden truth. Psychology reveals people who get anxious when guests arrive are not antisocial. They are self-aware survivors whose brains learn to protect peace at all costs. And once that peace is honored rather than violated, anxiety loses its power, and the doorbell no longer sounds like an alarm, but simply a choice.